That was sort of the push to quit Google and move back to India. This is the only real opportunity I have to take that risk, and I can't take that risk sitting in America.
So how does an opinionated product scale up?
Madhav Bhagat is the founder and CTO of SpotDraft, an AI powered legal tech platform helping brands like Airbnb and PhonePe to close deals faster and automate legal workflows.
I feel people operating in the nichest of niches are going to be more successful than people who are coming from outside and trying to solve.
What does it mean to meter it? Madhav, welcome to the Founder Thesis podcast. Before we come to your current venture, which is SpotDraft in the legal tech space, I want to kind of understand your journey of getting here. You've been a serial entrepreneur, worked in the US. Just give me like a sneak peek of the journey to SpotDraft.
Thanks, Akshay. Super excited to be here. So, before SpotDraft, I was actually working on a startup while I was at Google in New York, which was called DrinkLink. It was a nightlife concierge service, and we were trying to solve a problem that we felt ourselves, which was that if you're a bunch of guys trying to go out in New York City, it's very hard to know where you'll get in and where you won't. So we set up this app called DrinkLink, which allowed you to put in your requirements, your budget, and then nightlife venues, be it bars, pubs, or nightclubs, would bid on you and confirm whether they would let you in. So instead of you going and wasting time at around different places not getting in, you could know for sure that you're going to get a good deal and you would get into a spot. So that was
Did you
sorry. Go
quit
ahead.
your day job to do this?
I quit my day job because I wanted to work on startups, not necessarily just that one. And as you might be aware, on a H1B, it's very hard to do anything which is not your core job, because as soon as you quit your job, you have to leave the country in 30 or 60 days. So, with that sort of sword hanging over me, and this was back, when the Flipkarts and the Snapdeals were really going and raising obscene amounts of money. And when you're sitting there in New York City, it's a comfortable life, but you're like, this is the only real opportunity I have to take that risk, and I can't take that risk sitting in America. So that was sort of the push to quit Google and move back to India. And as I moved back here and I was working on this startup, I also set up a dev shop in India, mostly to get engineers for the startup for DrinkLink. But as part of that, we also started talking to other founders and other entrepreneurs to understand, what was going on in the Indian ecosystem, where people were really allocating time and capital. And that was a great experience from a learning perspective. And that is also how SpotDraft came to be. So while I knew Shashank, my co-founder, from New York, and we had met at a couple of parties, a lot of our interactions were limited to me getting free legal advice from him and him getting free technical advice from me. So it was around that time that he was trying to figure out how to solve this contracting problem that he had seen as a corporate lawyer on Wall Street, but also as a lawyer sitting in India. So he moved back independently, and he's like, I'm just trying to extract these rights and obligations. And yeah, I told him, see, AI can do it to a certain level, but it's not going to be fully accurate. And so we built something very simple for him. It probably took like a week, and
So
he's
he was
like
your
this.
client, basically.
So he
Like
was, yeah, in a way, more
coded
a
by
friend than a
your
client.
your dev shop. He was a
Yeah,
client of.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
we got it built probably
Hmm.
within a week, and then he started seeing a lot of value from that, and that is sort of the genesis of SpotDraft, because he's like, okay, how do we productionize this and how do we sell this? And he's like, if you don't come on board, I can never figure it out because I know zero tech. So we sort of teamed up. He had spent, I think, 6 months set where SpotDraft was available as a tool for freelancers and single mom and pop type operations to really help just draft contracts, and that's why the name also SpotDraft. And then when we realized that there was this opportunity to solve the contract review problem, is when we teamed up and we started, raising capital, building this solution to help others. What we had built for him, we wanted to productionize it and sell it. So then we started going and talking to customers, investors, and hearing these signals of, okay, you actually need a review tool that lets you do more than just see obligations, because what each person cares about is different. This tool was, of course, built with what Shashank cared about, but when we spoke to customers, they kept coming to us with different asks, and that's when we decided, let's make a contract review tool as a product. Now, this was back in 2018, 2017, and I would say we were a little bit ahead of the tech at that time. So this was when Transformers, which is the T in GPT, had just come out, and it was the state of the art, and we were, of course, using it, but it wasn't as general purpose as a lot of these models are today. So we started, collecting data, training our own models, did a lot of that heavy lifting, and we even managed to close a few really large customers, like the biggest private bank in India, the biggest telecom operator in Europe. We had a large Japanese investment bank, and all of them said that, we'll give you access to our data, you train models for us, and this was their digital transformation story. Of course, they did not give us enough data, so the results were subpar. And as a part of some of the work I did at Google, I also built an AI solution in Google Forms. And a key takeaway from me from back then was, if you ask the user to do extra work to train your AI, then no one likes doing extra work, right? So they will not do it. And that's essentially what happened with the initial SpotDraft solution as well, is that users would just not give us the data, and then they would come back and say your tool doesn't work.
So this DrinkLink, then you shut it down?
Yeah, we had to shut it down. I mean, it was also an operational challenge because so one thing was that we were not collecting the booking fees upfront. So what we would do is partner up with the venues and say, you'll pay us 5, 10, 15% of whatever the spend was after the billing was done. And of course, that became a collections nightmare, to the extent that we had 1 million in GMV, and I think our collections was at the level where the GMV was 100K. So we were missing almost 90% of our collections.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then we
India
also
is a
realized,
graveyard of these ideas, right? There was
oh yeah,
Dine
yeah.
Out, there was
So then
Crown
that's one
It.
of the reasons why we set up the India team, is like, okay, let's set up, payments on the platform. It was a very simplistic approach we were using till then. And then what we also realized is that there is a large pull that we are seeing from corporate event bookings. So we created another brand which was focused on corporate bookings, and we started getting decent amount of interest from them. The ticket sizes were larger, 20, $50,000, so it was easier for us to manage as well. But when you go corporate, then you also have the expectation of a certain level of operational excellence. And what that meant was that we had to deploy people on the ground, and now that would eat into our margins. And imagine finding someone in New York City who's willing to work on a Friday night or a Thursday night, and sit in a bar but not be part of the party. So it became a big challenge because of that. And it also, at that point, I was sitting here, and my partner and co-founder at the time was sitting in New York, and there was always this 24-hour gap and time zone challenges and all of that. So that's sort of when we decided that, while this is a great lifestyle business, scaling it requires just so much. Like, even on ops, it's a very operational heavy business, and running an operational heavy business in America is very, very hard, as you can tell with all the quick commerce apps that have come and gone there. So that's sort of when we decided that it's not working out, and yeah, we decided to just shutter at that point. And we had done, I think, 3 million in GMV by that point. So it was a good experience from a learning standpoint. But I did take away that, build something that you can operationalize in the long run, because it was working, because we would be the ones, going to these bars and making sure everything was in order. But of course, that cannot scale.
Right. Okay. Interesting. And the dev shop also you closed down once you got into SpotDraft.
Yeah, so the dev shop, for me was a initially it was set up because I didn't have a way to hire people for the US company in India. So we just set it up as a that being the start point, and then we did get a few other clients. But the challenge with customers in India that we spoke to was they would fall in two extremes. Okay, one extreme would be that I want everything the best, and then of course being a new business with a very lean team, doing that becomes very challenging. Where, oh, you only have one designer, how will this happen? So they would not come to us. And the other extreme was, you're competing with folks who would do everything under the sun for 5,000 rupees. And of course that means that the customer just cares about getting the cheapest solution out as opposed to getting something that works. So then again, there was a challenge of, okay, we won't be price competitive, and people just did not care about quality at that point. So what we then decided was, I worked with a few good folks. In fact, we were cash flow positive for most of that dev shop's existence, but it was just such a drain. I was doing sales as well as, leading the technical side, and it just wasn't scalable because as soon as you bring some of those senior people in, you become cash flow negative. So that was when Shashank came about, and he's like, "Can you help me with this?" And the timing just worked out. So moved all the people from the dev shop to build SpotDraft V0, and then once that took off, I decided that I would want to dedicate all my time and mental energy to SpotDraft.
Okay, interesting. What was the specific? You said Shashank first got it built for his internal use. Internal use in which company, or like where was he working that he wanted this tool built?
So he was working at Rupee Power, which was this loan pricing engine. So all the loans that you go and get on any bank website would be priced by them. And he was also doubling up as the lawyer there because, when you have a lawyer, you don't want to pay someone. So that is when he would go through, and because they would have a lot of really complex asks around rights and obligations. A bank is like, if your website goes down for half a minute, you will pay me 50 lakh rupees, or that's of course a exaggeration, but things like that. So he would spend an obscene amount of time also doing that, and he just wanted a simple way to say, okay, I'll give you a document and you just tell me what the rights and obligations are, so I don't have to go through 500 pages, I can go through 1 or 2 pages. So that is where the start point was. And he found it so valuable, then he must have shown it to some folks, and they were like, oh, how do I get access to this? And that then became the start point. And this is around when he had anyway started SpotDraft, but he was looking at it from a enabling and democratizing law for freelancers and really small companies. But of course, the things we were building are much more valuable when you have a large company, because that is when tracking these rights and obligations becomes a Herculean effort. If you're a one-person shop, you know what those rights are because that's what keeps you up at night. And that is when it went from being a tool for him to a tool that we wanted to give to others. And we started talking to customers and prospects, and we realized that there is a large problem in this space. NDA review, people were spending $500 per NDA, right? So we were like, okay, we can do better. We can get it down to $5, $50, even without AI. We could do it for $5, $50 with just humans. But because we had this tool in place, we said with AI we can do it even cheaper, and people love that, and that's why they sort of we got a lot of interest in our pilot phase.
So in the pilot phase, you were selling it as a service.
In the pilot phase, we had built out a solution that you can upload a file and it'll highlight. We used to call it RAG analysis, which is red, amber, green. So it would color code your document, and parts would be green, and it'll give you an explanation why it's green. But the big challenge was that, well, twofold. One was when you go and ask an organization what is red, amber, and green for you, now that internally starts their own debate where they're like, oh no, I will not why should we accept this? So like, we would not get a clear picture until we spent a few cycles with them. And then the other challenge was that we had explicitly in our contract said you have to give us 100 good examples and 100 bad examples so that we can train our AI on top of it. So imagine like a NDA that you refuse to sign, right? So 100 examples of that, and then 100 examples of the final, post negotiation NDA that you sign. So with one of our customers, they tried really, really hard, but they were only able to find, I would say, some 50 contracts. And that too, when we started running our engine on it, it's like, okay, 25 of these are duplicates. It's like because you never store older versions, right? Yeah, it's like three people send the same file from their inbox because you never store the bad version. The good version is still, sitting in some shared drive somewhere, but the old ones aren't. And that is when we spent a lot of time and built a lot of tooling to generate synthetic data. We pulled some 2 million contracts from the public internet, like SEC, Edgar, and all the filings that public companies have to do. But still, when we got that data and trained the model, the accuracy was good. But if there is something which is very, very nuanced and specific to an industry or a customer, we did not have that in that training set, and we were not able to then get as good an accuracy. We tried things like back translation, where we take a contract, translate it to German, then back to English, because now it says the same thing but in a different way, right? We would reverse the obligation. So it's like, if your thing says I should be allowed to visit the campus at any time, then we'll reverse it and say, the other party should be allowed to visit the campus at any time. And of course, that means it's a negative thing which should probably be highlighted in red. So we did all of that. We got to some 70-80% accuracy. But the big thing we realized was that if I need to onboard 10 more customers, I'll spend like how much time just training all these models and gathering this data for those 10 customers. And that means that it's not going to scale like a software business, it's going to scale almost like a services business. Even though what we want to sell is a software, to get that software working, I need to do so much onboarding and services before that. So that sort of took me back to at Google. I had built in Google Forms an AI solution using only Google internal data, and that data was created by anyone who had ever used Forms would have created that data. So can we get the user to create the data while they are doing what they anyways do? And for lawyers, the place that they create data is when they are editing these contracts. So then we built an editor which had superpowers for lawyers. So if you hover on a definition, it would show that definition in line, right? If you clicked on it, it would navigate you to that part, like Article 3.5.4, right? Instead of you having to find it in the document, we would take you there. So there, what we would also do is now track the contract from its first version that you received to the final version that you sent. So the idea was, now we'll get this data, but as we started
This was
selling
a
this.
collaborative tool like a Google
Yeah.
Doc.
So
And
editor, and we had the review tool built in, and we had some other things like, we would verify that if you say section 2.5, does that section even exist in your document, right? Some basic clerical or paralegal work we would automate for you, and keep track of the edit history. So that was
had you
great.
worked on Google Docs or something like that, or at Google?
So I was part of the Google Apps team, which is where docs and slides and everything falls. But I actually was part of the team that was almost like a startup within that org, because we built out Google Classroom from scratch. When I joined the team, it was two engineers, one manager and one engineer. And when I left, I think it was a team of 60 or 80. And we had scaled it to um, tens of millions of DAUs or more than that. I don't recall the exact number, but we had a pretty successful worldwide launch. And during COVID, I actually heard from some of my old friends there, and they are like, "Oh, we've crossed 100 million or 500 million because now everyone is using it every day." So it was there that then what we realized was that teachers need multiple choice questionnaires, right, and to
Hmm.
grade them. And
So
instead of
Google
us
Form
building
was
it,
a part of.
yeah. So now Google Forms came into our team, and so that uses all the same infrastructure as editors. So I was exposed to a lot of that, and I was always very interested in AI. So even before the Brain and all those teams came about, we built this solution. And one of the reasons for me leaving was that while that solution had been live within Google for months, we just could not get it launched because there was all this operational checklist, bureaucracy almost at a size and scale of Google you have to jump through. So that was another reason for me to want to leave. And Then I saw that the feature I had built was released 2 years after I left. And when I looked at some of the code behind it, and you can go poke around, it was still using the exact same code. So that just shows that 2 years later, finally they launched it, right? Um, so while I hadn't worked on editors, I had a pretty fair and substantial understanding of how those things worked, and we were using those same techniques here as well. So what we wanted to do was, as we got people to start using the editor, then they're like,
One
"Oh,
one question first. Hold on. Okay, I understand the editor is solving the problem of data access. I don't understand what were you building the model for? What was the end goal of the model that you were building? That it should read a contract and accurately classify the information inside it?
something like that. I can elaborate a little bit. Basically what we would do is, imagine you're signing an NDA and you're like, I want to make sure that all recordings of the podcast are covered under confidential information, right? Because that is your most important asset. So you would set up our tool saying, confidential information must include recordings. Now what we would do is we would go through the document, and where confidential information is defined, we would say, okay, this guideline that you've mentioned is what should compare against it. So first part was figuring out which one applies where, because you could have 50 guidelines and the document could be 100 pages. So that we trained a simpler model for, which would take two pieces of text and just say, are they related or not? And then once you get the related pieces of text, then we would have another model that would go and say, okay, given this guideline and this text, is it red, amber, or green? And give me a reasoning why it is red, amber, or green. So that was the model that we would essentially train. And for some customers, we had trained 10 of those models, because the variety was such within their documents and their guidelines that one model couldn't do it all. And this was, back when Transformers just came out and BERT was the state of the art. So we even trained our own BERT from scratch. And that cost some $30,000 or $50,000 back then, and it was a pretty significant impact and cost for a company of our size, which was like just starting out. But thankfully, we had credits from the GCP and AWS. We were able to utilize those. So that gave us a 10-15% accuracy boost, but still we had to fine tune and train more models on top of it each time for each different question. And that's where it became, if I have to onboard 10 customers, I have to train 100 models. My costs go through the roof, my operational overhead goes through the roof. And that's when we realized that it's not necessarily the right timing from a tech readiness perspective. And this was also incidentally around the time where people using the editor started asking us, okay, can you give me control over, can I make this a template, can I get some approval controls on it, or when I send it out to the counterparty, can I remove internal comments automatically? So we started building these things. As they came together, it became sort of what is called a workflow. Now when you have an editor and a workflow together, that beast is called a contract management platform. So we didn't even know that we were building a CLM till we had built some parts of it. And a lot of that build was just happening based on user feedback.
Right.
So
This
once we
CLM stands
realized
for
how, sorry,
Contract
go ahead.
Lifecycle Management.
Yes,
CLM.
CLM is contract
Okay.
lifecycle management. It
Hmm.
is, um, if you've ever used a Salesforce or a HubSpot, a CRM, it is, imagine a CRM for your contracts. And approvals, reviews, managing edit history, version history is sort of the key basic features in it. And so then we spend a lot of time building that. We realized that this is a pretty large market. There were incumbents who were really old school, and we wanted to really attack that from a new cloud first, new age, simple UX approach. And we saw a lot of good traction there. Then we started seeing a, a larger and larger sort of ask from them, and we started just building those things. So we got went from having one customer. And I distinctly remember one of our early sort of moments as a startup was that we had Whatfix as our first real customer, and they opened a ticket saying something is not working, and everyone was cheering that, oh, someone is opened a ticket means that they're actually using
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that was the moment that, okay, clearly we are solving a problem, because they're like, I need this fixed because my deal is stuck because of this. Okay, now we
Hmm.
are in the critical
Hmm.
part of your business, which means we are adding value. So we
So
scale that
that was
pretty
when you
aggressively.
found PMF, basically.
Yeah,
With
I would say
the
before
CLM was.
pre.
uh,
Yeah. So the CLM was the PMF moment because we started seeing value that we were giving to customers. Because if it goes down, people start calling you, means it's important, right? That's and thankfully it only went down a couple of times, but that is how we knew. And what also worked in our favor was this was also around the time that um, when we had a lot of product readiness is also when COVID hit. So what ended up happening was that everyone was doing sales online and everything had to move online. So there was both a pull from the demand side because now everyone is looking for these solutions to better collaborate with legal. And we also had a level playing field with other players sitting out of the US because they are also getting on Zoom calls to sell. We are also getting on Zoom calls. So no, they don't have that advantage of, oh, I'll drop by your office, and that leveled the playing field for us. So in a way, COVID worked to our advantage in those early days, and then sort of what ended up happening is we started seeing, okay, now GPT is coming out, and we in fact did
Okay,
a
one sec
course.
before GPT. This CLM space, I want to understand it a bit better. Who are the legacy companies here in the CLM space?
So the big old ones are Syrian Labs and iCertis. So you can almost think of them like a SAP style model where it's a platform on which you can build anything. So it is more about customizing it so you can capture your workflow on it, but that also means that it's very complex to use and it requires a pretty significant implementation to actually get it to work. So one of the customers we onboarded, they said we've been trying to go live with one of these two for the last 2 years, and we came in and we said we will add contractually that you will be live in 90 days because we are confident, and we got them live in 60 days.
Hmm. How did you compress the implementation timeline? Like what was fundamentally different in your product as compared to an iCertis product that the
Yeah,
implementation
see,
could happen in 60
we
days?
were a lot more opinionated in that this is how it works, and instead of it being a customization that you can build on top of the platform, we made it a configuration that you can choose one of few paths. So now, instead of you having to start from scratch, we will provide you, okay, this is all the ways you can configure it. You tell me how you want to configure it. So there was a little bit of a give and take where some processes on their end might also need to change, but a lot of our implementation was greenfield. So what would end up happening is the customer would say, okay, I don't actually know what the best path is, so you guys also tell us how we should be structuring our processes. So there was some level of them adjusting to make sure the process adjusted to our tool, and us making it configurable so that whatever their critical asks were still covered by us. As opposed to in iCertis, you can do anything, but you have to start almost from scratch. So that was the big differentiator. And the other good thing was that there were a few new age competitors based out of the US who were really educating the market. So we were sort of following in their footsteps, you could say, that people were now aware of and okay with a cloud-based CLM that can be configured and not a on-prem CLM that can be customized. So it worked that way. It worked in our favor.
This DocuSign is one of the new age ones, or is DocuSign a CLM?
So DocuSign is a very interesting player. We do not really consider them as a large competitor to us. So DocuSign's bread and butter is, of course, the signing piece. They have acquired over the past 5-8 years 4 different CLMs, and we like to think of it as so the challenge from DocuSign is that because they're such an incumbent, they think that we can also always go and upsell a CLM, but most of their acquisitions have not gone through successfully in terms of an outcome. Of course, the acquisition closed, but once, like, I would love to understand why they have not been able to sell, because when we heard that news, we were extremely concerned that of course, that brand presence is so strong. How are we going to compete? But we would go into deals and hear that, oh yeah, their sales team hasn't even replied to us, so they are not even an option for us anymore. So they acquired four different CLMs, and the most recent one was last year, and we have not heard of them in many of our competitive bidding processes. So maybe they might be focusing on a different part of the market, upper enterprise, as opposed to we are primarily focused on SMB. And I think there is a lot of reasons for us to do that as well. So that hasn't been a big challenger for us.
What are the reasons to focus on SMB?
See, one thing we realized is, A, enterprise sales take much longer, and then B, all our competition is moving up market. So there's just a lot more competition there, because for them to justify their COGS sitting out of US, which is a very heavy cost market, it becomes that if I don't get a 6 7 figure deal, I can't even dedicate people on it. Versus me sitting here, I have a lot more flexibility. And because everyone is moving up market, means that the mid market becomes a lot less fierce of a competition, and it's open. So we want to sort of, if in the CRM world, Salesforce is that enterprise behemoth, but you have a HubSpot who owns mid market. And if we can replicate that, get some 20,000 customers in mid market, we don't need anyone. We don't even want enterprise then, because we have enough revenue, enough TAM, enough market to be able to sustain and make a profitable business out of it.
Okay. This opinionated product strategy sounds like a double-edged sword. Like, on the one hand, yes, onboarding is faster because there are limited choices, and people who are getting 80% of what they need would be okay to let go of the remaining 20%, modify internal processes. But it could be reverse also, right? There's somebody to whom you're only able to give him 20% of what he needs, and he would end up not buying your product. How does an opinionated product scale up?
Yeah, so see, it's a great question, and this is something we also keep running into. So, what we realized was that a lot of the discovery work that happens on product really has to be done in a strong way. Otherwise, it's very easy for things to break. And we've actually seen that play out. So, our initial customer set was sitting out of India. So, when we started our initial first round of sales in the US, there was a lot of pushback, even in terms of the terminology used in the product, not even the workflows and the processes that we had built. So that's when we realized that we can't just rely on Indian customers. We have to over-index on the US market. And another example of that would be, so we would say that we would do white glove onboarding, because we realize that's the best way to get customers to see value quickly, because we know everything we can do, and internally it's much easier to get it done. Now that meant that we would not expose each and every configuration to the end user. But when you go to America, they want that control, right? They thrive on that, and they have that, I should be able to configure it on my own. So then,
Yeah, Indians are used
really
to done
early,
for you,
yeah. So
rather than
really early when we
self-service.
started selling there, we almost had to revisit some of our core decision and say, no, this has to be configurable self-serve. It can't be something that we configure during onboarding. So it is a double-edged sword, and people who fall under our exact, ICP, whatever research we've done, they love it, because they're like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense. This is amazing. But as soon as someone needs some change outside of that, it becomes, oh, what do you mean this is not possible? And what we've learned over the years is to really treat all those opinions as best effort or suggestions, and not bake it into the product, because we are still unbaking some of the things we baked in super early on. And that for me is, as long as you have enough customer conversations and don't over index on one geo or one vertical, you will be fine. And now we are seeing that, especially for example in finance, everyone come at whatever questions they have, we have solid answers to, because we've dealt with so many finance customers. So it's also, once you spend enough time in a vertical, you have the right answers to give, because even though your product might solve it, if you don't know how to position it in the way that makes sense to them, they are not going to be able to onboard it.
Interesting, very interesting. This, I guess, being able to reframe the product in a way that your customer gets it. Sometimes it's just a reframing challenge.
Yeah, and one thing we learned there is, instead of talking about features and problems, if we can talk about the value that we are able to drive, then the conversation becomes a lot more like the customer then understands that, see, this is the value I want to see. This is how you are showing that value. Okay. If I go and say, this is the problem you have, this, they are like, that's problem number 25 for me. I don't care, right? I care about closing deals faster. That is what my job as a legal person is. And if we go and say we are going to help you close deals faster by, doing all of this, now we're in business.
Hmm. So I guess you need to have an insider's understanding of the market, which Shashank probably had, to understand how to communicate value and even to identify what is value. All of this you need to spend time either studying your customers or having worked in that sector. One of these would help. Uh, this unbaking that you spoke of, give me an example of that. Like,
So we said that, every contract has a legal user who reviews the contract and has a business user who owns the contract. Not always the case, but if you build everything with that assumption, now undoing that assumption in the code and in the process and in the, in basically every part of the tool is a pretty heavy lift. So that is where, because when we spoke to, let's say, 10 customers, they said, yeah, every time we have a legal user who owns the review side and a business user who owns the contract. But now we have customers who are like, actually, no, it's owned by three different departments because there's three different pieces to the contract. Like, the infosec team owns this part, the sales team owns this part, the procurement team owns this part. And so now it's like, okay, we need to have multiple business owners. And then they're like, okay, the review, actually, I don't want to set it up in the beginning because based on the time zone, the value of the contract, the area, the entity that it's working with, I might have different reviewers. So now we built a way where you can define this review sort of matrix, and it will automatically choose the right person. So there's always things to learn, and the more open-ended you keep things early on, the better. We put some of this as almost hard assumptions in the code. So then we had to go back and remove those assumptions. And of course, as you build on top of assumptions, it becomes very harder and harder to do that.
what do you think are the key skills a successful product manager should have? I mean, to me, it sounds like you are head of product for SpotDraft. So, considering that you are leading a large product, what are really the uh, the challenges that you have to balance out, the different forces that are pulling on you in different directions, and how do you really succeed as a product manager?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think um, empathy and curiosity towards the customer and their problems and their processes are probably the biggest one, because if you don't understand what the customer is doing, it's very, very hard to go ahead and do anything to improve it, right? So being able to really empathize and talk to customers and understand their problems with a curious mindset is probably the biggest one. The second biggest one, and I think this anyone who's ever done any product will empathize with, is having a solid reasoning or framework around reasoning of how you say no, right? Like now we have some 400-500 customers. Every customer is like, oh, make this improvement. This is my, everyone is a product manager. They'll come with their own ideas and own suggestions. How do you take that suggestion and think about it in a way that generalizes, and how do you say no in a way that the customer doesn't feel slighted, but instead they understand that, oh, they did not understand the full picture, and that is why it's not possible or should not be done or cannot be done, right? So managing that, being able to say no to the right things and forcing the team to say no to good ideas so that they can work on great ideas, I think that's a huge hard skill to have. And finally, I would say the what I've seen, and some of my colleagues at Google do really well, is a lot of times it's very easy to go into this feature factory mode, that, oh, let's build this feature also, let's build that feature also. In classroom, the feature surface area we had was tiny. to the extent that I was talking to the PM and I was like, we have built nothing. Are you sure people are going to use this? And he's like, trust me, we are saving them hours and hours of time just with this simple tool. And having that conviction, having that vision that even with a very simple tool, I know I'm going to save hours and hours of customer time, is a very hard thing to do, because it's very natural. Oh yeah, there's a great idea, let's build it. But great product managers will take that idea and say, this is why we shouldn't build it, right? This is why we are not going to solve this problem. And that, I think, is a very, very hard skill.
Yeah, building something which is simple is like really like top 1% of I guess product teams are really able to build truly simple software. Yeah, that's really, and I guess that is also like you need to be opinionated to build something which is simple to use, right? Like that's why Apple is so loved. It is extremely opinionated, but they are also maniacal about keeping it simple for users, keeping it intuitive. Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's come back to the journey. So you said once COVID hit, you had all those, um, uh, all the advantages which a US based company had got erased. You were at a level playing field. You were able to onboard customers for the CLM. Then you were talking of the GPT moment. So why don't you just pick up the story from there?
Yeah. So, see, we were always an AI first company, and I would and
But
still
the
do in
CLM
my.
was not AI, right?
So see, CLM, contract templates, negotiation, comments, reviewing, signing. There's really no AI there. There's more workflows and processes. Of course, we
Mm,
were always trying to put AI. Like we were like, okay, you give me a Word document which has come from a lawyer, I will automatically generate a template outfit. I will automatically try to review your contract and insert or suggest comments for you. So we were
mm,
always trying those things, but it was always a challenge, making it work with the technology that was available. And I have always been interested in AI, so I would keep reading papers. So BERT was what we used. It didn't work. There were a lot of different variations of it that came out. We used all of them. Then Google released a model called T5, which was multitask. So instead of doing one task, you could teach it to do many tasks. So we again went and trained that on all the tasks we had. At that point, we had some 200 different tasks that we were doing. Still, the accuracy was around 60-70%, which for a lawyer isn't good enough, because at that point they're like, I'm anyways going to review everything, because I can't be 60% right.
AI was like that Microsoft Clippy. Like MS Office had that Clippy feature which was supposed to predict what you needed and suggest, etc. But obviously, most people would just find it
Yeah, it
irritating.
would get it wrong more
Uh,
than it would get it right.
right.
So,
Okay.
so we were keeping very close tabs on what was going on, and this is when GPT 3 or 2.5 was released, and that was almost like a step change from my perspective, because we were doing all these evaluations, and this was the first model that, without any fine tuning or training, was able to match what our fine tuned and trained models were doing, and as one model, not train 10 different models. So we actually did an internal company all hands where we spoke about, okay, this is the future. And this was, I think, early 20s, and I can look up the exact date because that message is still sitting in our Slack. And that is when, like Shashank and all the lawyers were like, I don't even understand what you're saying. And I was like, see, if you ask it, you can tell it to think in steps, and then it gives you the right answer. So, this is going to be a big deal. And people were just like, this engineer is doing engineering things. Uh, but what we started doing was started using it, and we started seeing a lot of improvements, right? And
Like
this is when we
OpenAI
then.
had made it available.
Yeah, yeah. So this is when OpenAI had just released it, and it was still a very engineering and tech first solution, and very in that niche. It was not something that anyone outside of the tech community even knew about. So then we started saying, okay, now with this technology, we can actually go back to our roots and solve that contract review problem and be first to market with it. And in fact, we built and were first to market in a lot of ways with the automated contract review tool using transformers. Of course, as we were building, GPT 3.5 came out, GPT 4, which was in a lot of ways another step function change came out. And then we were pretty certain that this is the future. So we really doubled down. We built Verify, which is our automated contract review tool built on top of this. Now, back then, again, it was so expensive that we had to meter everything. So we built it. We were seeing, super large contracts with a lot of guides might even cost us $40 for one single review. So we were like, if you're giving this away as a flat pricing and not a per contract pricing, which is what customers wanted, then we have to meter it and we have to, really track everything.
What does it mean to meter it?
So every single time you run a review, I am going to track it. And ideally, I want to say, as if you pay $50 a month or $500 a month, you get 5 reviews or 10 reviews. Anything above that, you have to pay $10 or $20 per review. And another reason for metering it was for us to actually know the cost, right? Like I know the maximum based on all the limits we had was $40 per contract. On average, it was more like $4 per contract. So how do I make sure that I'm not losing money on a per user basis? So that's when the whole metering piece came out, and we built all of it. Then, as the newer models came out, Gemini came out with 1/10 the cost. We went from $40 to 4/10 of a cent over the course of 2 years. So now my metering became more expensive than what I was metering. And that was the time when we were like, okay, we don't need to meter it. We changed how we were selling it to our customers. Earlier, it was a per seat, some fair usage policy. You click a button, you consume a credit. All of that we can now remove, and we can just say, okay, we are going to charge you another 20% on your per seat cost if you want AI. That's it. So it's a flat, much easier to reason about and talk about pricing as opposed to it being like, oh, give me 10,000 credits, which means I can run it on 5,000 documents. And now, lawyers are doing math in Excel, and things, things are going to be hard to close. Uh, so basically, we went from CLM contract review to CLM back to contract review, and now within our CLM we have these AI features sort of peppered everywhere. Like if a salesperson uploads a contract, it'll automatically review it. It'll tell the salesperson what are the potential things that the legal team is going to flag. So even before the contract goes to legal, it goes back to sales, and sales is like, okay, let me start pushing back on these things so I can keep that conversation really warm and not have to wait for legal to get back. So we've started seeing that happen pretty frequently. We have this tool called smart data capture that extracts structured data from contracts, and of course contracts are unstructured, and that has become a key part of a workflow for a lot of our customers. So now imagine you close a deal which says I need to ship 100 modems at this price point by the end of this quarter. Now that data has to go to an ERP, which is where the rest of the org will pick it up and make sure it gets to the right person. With smart data capture, first I'll get that data out of your contract, even if it is signed on paper, and then I will push it to your ERP. So instead of you having to do it manually, it happens all automatically. And we are seeing certain customers are using this to even onboard drivers and educators, where to get into the system, you go sign a contract on SpotDraft, and then SpotDraft sends the information to their system, which then creates and activates their account. So earlier it would be a manual 4 5 step process. Now the driver just fills the contract and they're done. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting use cases. In fact, we didn't even think of this use case. So when our customer success associate was visiting our customer, they're like, "What is that QR code which says sign this contract?" And they're like, "Yeah, that QR code goes to SpotDraft." And we were like, "Wow."
Right. Mm-hmm. Uh, so, do you also do contract drafting?
So we would generally tell the customers to get their own lawyer and draft their own contract. Of course, if you want a contract to be drafted based on publicly available knowledge, we do support that. But we are not a legal services company. We don't provide legal advice. So we try to, stay away from it. Now, you can use a chat GPT to draft a contract. You can use our agent to draft a contract, but we will not tell you what is right or wrong, because that then goes into that legal advice part of things, and that is something that we are not set up for. We are not a law firm. We don't provide legal advice at all.
But isn't this also just a data problem? Like you have now you are privy to thousands, hundreds of thousands of contracts that your customers are drafting. So you have enough data to create a lawyer agent, AI agent, which is a lawyer.
Yeah, so see, I can what the approach we take there is that we will help you draft the contract best. So what that means is I will show you all the previous versions of an indemnity clause that you've used so you can choose the right one. But do I know which is the right one in this scenario as spot draft, not having all the understanding of your business, your risk tolerance? I do not. And what I don't want to do is say that this is a approved contract, because if something goes south, the reason you pay the lawyer is because you're going to hold his neck and say, okay, now you come and defend what you wrote. But we are not set up for that. So we will definitely enable the lawyer to draft a better contract, more informed decisions on that contract, and do it faster. But we don't want to be that lawyer doing it ourselves.
Got it. Interesting. What is happening in the legal tech space overall? Like, is uh, is any company trying to take that lawyer TAM? Like, there is this popular term of salary TAM, that AI is coming for the salary TAM. That instead of paying salary to 10 people, you will pay salary to 10 agents, for example. So, is there somebody who's coming for that legal fees TAM?
See, I think that's a great question and something we speak about a lot. Just to set the context, right? If you look at any large company and you look at the legal team spend, the top two line items may be flipped, but they are always going to be in-house legal cost and external legal counsel cost. So, and there is this list of top 500 law firms in America. The one at the bottom of that list does millions in revenue, right? The top of the list you can forget about because they do billions. So our view is that there is definitely going to be a change here where if we can enable lawyers to do some of the things that they would have to go to external counsel for at a much, much cheaper price point, they are going to use that. So we have our own agentic solution called Sidebar, which we are testing with customers, and we have a lot of them using it. So we are seeing two things play out. One is that a lot of customers would, and in-house legal teams at these customers companies would not do certain activities because it's just too time consuming and too expensive. So one of the guys is telling us that he subscribes to 50 newsletters to stay on top of regulations across the globe, but he basically does it on his commute to and from work every day because those newsletters are general purpose. So they are an FMCG company who do wholesaling, right? So he's like, I don't know which of the newsletters, which of the new laws apply to wholesale versus retail. So half my time is just spent doing that. So in Sidebar, you can just say, I'm a wholesaler. These are the newsletters. Go read them and give me a weekly digest, right? So now he started using it for that, and he's like, now I don't know what to read on my commute because I have too much time, right? And then we have another customer who's again an FMCG but in retail. So they have the same exact use case but in a different way. So the key thing with agents, which I think other software solutions before did not unlock as easily, is you can configure an agent to do exactly what you want because you can almost code the agent in plain English. So this is an example of something that probably you wouldn't even do, right? So this is new capability or new, value that's being unlocked. On the other side, there are things that, you are in an M&A and you need a external legal firm to do due diligence on hundreds or thousands of contracts. Now you're looking at a bill of 6-7 figures USD. What our agent is able to do is, okay, let's do a first pass review of those contracts in minutes as opposed to days, and costing hundreds or thousands of dollars as opposed to 6-7 figures. So earlier I would say, what, once the deal is very close to completion, only then we'll involve the lawyers because it's going to cost a lot. Now we are seeing our new customers come in and say, oh, as part of the deal due diligence, before we close it, let's start looking at these contracts because now I can and I don't need to go to, and pay so much money. So what they do is they'll run the agent to get that first pass, and then use a subset of that data and send it to external counsel still. But now instead of external counsel going through 1,000 contracts, they're going through 500 contracts. Instead of them starting from scratch and each contract taking half a day, they start from an informed place and each contract takes maybe a few hours. So the council spend is not reducing, but it is becoming much more strategic and much more focused. And this is also playing out, in law firms where they are deploying AI agent solutions that again make them more effective and more productive. So it's happening on both sides, and we are even hearing emergent use cases coming out where earlier, if I wanted to create a report of what is the risk in all my old contracts, or how should I change my order form or my MSA to help contracts close faster, because what is it that people usually push back on? This is an effort that they would almost never take, or they would hire a new person just to do this. And now with our technology, you can do it in a few minutes without having to go and do it manually. So it's value unlock of new use cases as well as making existing use cases work much much faster.
Hmm. Um, so sidebar sounds like like a generic agent. So somebody who can read emails, summarize, categorize. Is that what it is, or have you specifically trained it for the legal domain, or like what is that? That help me understand
Yeah, so
sidebar a
there
little bit.
is, of course, a lot of overlap with any generic agent because the capability set is that standard capability set always needs to exist. So for example, you can do deep research on Gemini or on ChatGPT. You can do it with Sidebar as well. But the Sidebar deep research will give, like, if you ask, new GST laws are coming out in India, they're going to change the slabs. A Gemini or a Chat GPT will give you answers from news outlets, from blogs. We will give you answers from the Gazette of India, right? So we want to go to the authoritative sources because that is what the lawyers care about. So that is one big difference. The other big difference is that we really heavily over-index almost on making it work for lawyers' use cases. So we find to fine tune the models, everything to work better for those legal use cases. We also deeply integrate with the SpotDraft CLM, so you can ask, show me the last 5 contracts that were signed, which contracts don't have an indemnity clause, and it will go through your entire repository, do a deep research, find out those clauses, give you those answers. So it's also been tweaked to work from a lawyer mindset where a lot of times your Gemini or Chat GPT will use general knowledge to answer. We say if it's not written in the document, you cannot answer it. So focusing on reducing those sort of hallucinations, calling out ambiguity when it exists, linking to sources that lawyers care about. So we are looking at making verticalized version of Chat GPT or Gemini, and we are integrating with tools and providing tool sets. So for example, we have Verify, which is our contract review tool. Sidebar can actually use Verify to do review, right? We have smart data capture. So Sidebar can use smart data capture to extract data from hundreds or thousands of documents. So it's also, aggregating and amalgamating all our different AI solutions in a way where you can get more value and it is better used together as opposed to having to, oh, let me go extract it from one place, get an Excel sheet and upload it to Gemini and hope it works out well.
So I with agents, my experience has largely been Gemini, which comes with the Google suite. Um, so like for example in Google Sheets you can use Gemini, but my experience has been underwhelming so far. Like it's not really truly able to do the kind of things which you speak about, like go through my Google Drive and find the resume of product managers, for example. If I give that prompt, I think the response will be underwhelming. So is that the state of models today that you are seeing, or like what are you seeing?
See, I think, yeah. So, first of all, that's absolutely true what you're saying, especially in some of those open domain sort of scenarios. Like if you look at the Gemini agent in Sheets, you'll
Hmm.
be like, okay, format this sheet correctly. It can't. It just
It
will
can't.
not.
Yeah, it can't. Yeah, it's pretty
So
useless so far. Yeah.
yeah, it's a mix of, what is the capability set that has been given to the agents, which is what tools does it have access to, and how tuned is it to a particular domain. So Gemini, I think the big challenge is that they are trying to solve it for everything, right? You can use it in docs, you can use it in sheets, you can use it in Drive, it's its own standalone. So then you can't focus on one, right? So I would actually look at Cursor as a great example of what is possible when an agent is tuned to a particular domain. So Cursor, if you haven't heard or used it, is a IDE for developers, which is AI agent first. So imagine, all developers use an IDE, which is an integrated development environment, essentially place where you write code, and it has all the bells and whistles to make coding easier. So Cursor has an IDE which has an agent sitting inside it. So what it allows you to do is, instead of you sort of navigating the code and finding where things are happening, you can ask Cursor and it will navigate the code for you and give you answers. So that's sort of a very simplistic view on it. Now, what it does, and we've been using it for a good 6 months now. So in the beginning, people were like, yeah, it's, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I have to really give it the right signals and indications. Now with Claude 4 and Gemini 2.5, it's actually become significantly better, to the extent that we have actually given access to Cursor to our design and product team. And last quarter, they shipped 20 changes without involving engineering. Of course, we still have to go review and approve the code. But earlier, they would come to an engineer and ask, how does this work? Can I make this change? How much time will it take? All of those questions are now answered by Cursor, right? So is it, if they want to understand how a particular part of the code works, they'll go ask Cursor. Cursor will give them a very, very elaborate answer. Then they'll ask follow-ups, try to get an even deeper understanding, and then they'll go to the engineer saying, see, this is what Cursor is telling me. Is it right? And if it is right, does that mean that we can ship this feature in 2 days as opposed to 2 weeks? And that has been a fundamental shift in how we operate. In fact, now we have Cursor sitting inside our Slack environment, and I am seeing, if, let's say, customer success is asking, oh, some customer wants this to be done, can we answer, is it even possible? Like, sometimes you don't even know if it exists already, right? So now product managers are just asking Cursor, getting the answer, trying it out on the platform, and answering to the customer directly, right? And this doesn't involve writing code. So that is the biggest unlock, where if now someone who doesn't have a technical skill set is able to answer technical questions, and that is being enabled by Cursor. So in terms of what agents are making possible, I think if you look at agents that operate in a very constrained domain, there is a lot of really great value that's being added. For more open domain things, it's not as good. So for example, the example you were talking about, in Google Sheets, there's actually a YC company, I think, called Shortcut. They've built an agent that just does Excel. So there you can ask, do a DCF analysis and give me, it'll be able to do it. Fix the formatting, it's able to do it. So, it's also, if you have enough focus, then you know what those use cases are, and then you can truly solve for them. And that's why in Sidebar, we are able to say, like, one of the great examples that we've seen customers use us for is, oh, this new EU AI Act came out. I don't know what I need to change in my privacy policy, my DPA. So you can just give it your DPA, it will go find the EU AI Act and make the changes. And we've heard customers say this is 70-80% of my work is done, right? As opposed to, if you try to ask a Gemini to do it, it'll do all sorts of crazy things. So it's also having focused, because then you can really prompt and train the agent on that, right? And that has been what we are seeing across the board, like, even within uh, tools like Replit, like, which are all, again, little bit engineering or developing apps for non-engineers, is the place where the most value is being added right now, and which is why Cursor went from, I think, 100 mil to 500 mil in the course of a year in terms of ARR, because it's just so easy to deploy, because all those checks and balances are already present in that SDLC lifecycle, where you still have to get your code reviewed. It's not like suddenly the entire process has to change. So that also is another place where, if it is fitting very easily into an existing process, it's much easier to adopt. And those are some of the factors we are also keeping in mind as we are building out our agents.
Do you think there will be like all these products rebuilt AI native? Like, say, somebody will build an AI native spreadsheet software, and that would really have that magical experience where you no longer go inside the cells. I mean, even for a beginner, a spreadsheet is intimidating. Like, how do you use a spreadsheet? How do you feed in a formula? It's like low level coding, you could say, in a way. Putting a formula in a spreadsheet, you should know C3 is where the data is and whatever. So you could replace all this with just instructions. You think that's the way forward? Like, all of these tools will be rebuilt AI native, or there will be new companies building AI native spreadsheet, AI native word processor.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something again we keep thinking about, because we are also like, okay, is there going to be an AI native CLM, right? So I think the way I look at it and what we've seen play out is, at the end of the day, it's about, how much autonomy you are giving versus how much control does the user still have. And you can almost think of it as a slider. On full control, you just ask the agent to do something, you copy paste it, versus full autonomy, the agent is doing it all by itself. But at the end of the day, what we are seeing happen is you still need some level of deterministic behavior that is under your control. So, for example, if you look at a Canva, which is that social media content generation platform, they have an agent, but their agent is successful because if the agent makes a stupid mistake, I can just go change it in the Canva UI. I don't need to prompt it again. Right? Similarly, Cursor, if it makes a stupid mistake, I can write the code myself. Now, if there is an AI native solution being built, they will eventually reach a point where they need to build the non AI part of it, because the users will need to have that control. So either you partner with an AI native solution and you are the non AI part of it. Now that's what we are doing with, let's say, a Verify, where we are sitting inside Word. So anything we do wrong, you can just Command Z and undo it, or you can just go type it yourself. So that means, the autonomy isn't fixed at fully autonomous. It can easily go back to no autonomy at all. And which means that now the user isn't having to do extra work. But if you look at some of the competitors of Cursor, even for example, where they're like, there is no IDE, you just type what you want, we'll do it in the cloud and give you the code. And a lot of times it's like, oh, it's just made this one mistake. And now I have tried three prompts to tell it to fix that one mistake, and it just becomes worse and worse. Right? So that's when it breaks completely. So that's when, even when we're looking at competitors in the legal tech space, a lot of these AI native solutions are now building workflows, now building approvals, because those things you want to be deterministic, you want to be able to change by pressing a button and not having to explain in maybe half a paragraph that, oh, for this one approval change this one condition. If I have to explain it, I'm already like losing my mind, versus just having to click it. So I think the long term view from my perspective is some level of convergence there, where either it is the incumbents that are able to really give agents control over the existing UI, which means that I can see the agent do the work and stop it and change it at any given point, or it's going to be AI native companies that end up building all that stuff that the incumbents had, but maybe in a way that is more attuned to how you would do a chatbot, where the UI shows up in the middle of the chat as opposed to you having to go there. But I think that UI is going to still continue to exist, especially in enterprise sort of scenarios.
So, like, a chat GPT costs $20 a month. Does a sidebar cost similar, or like, how you price sidebar?
A sidebar is more expensive than 20. I think it's something we are still working out the pricing, because we are in the private beta phase, and we are also seeing what kind of usage people are doing to make sure that we price it at the right value add perspective. But we are looking at something like $350 a month for that. And for the core CLM, all the AI offerings are offered as a AI plus package on top of the existing per seat or per document charge that you pay for a CLM.
You said $350 a month per seat, or like a
Yeah, per seat.
flat? Okay.
And there
That
also
sounds like
there's
a
a
hard sell,
very
man.
interesting challenge, I'll tell you, is that you could buy one seat and then deploy it that everyone in your org sees value, because I am doing, regulatory compliance monitoring and sending out an email. Now the value is being seen by all the people reading that email, but the person paying it is just one person. So that's why this is indicative and early sort of thoughts around pricing. We are also looking at pricing it from an outcome perspective, like each and every successful chat you pay half a dollar for or a dollar for. That's something
But
that is now.
that's friction, right? Like, I mean, that's what you wanted to avoid, and you were able to.
See, yeah, so if I charge you for any chat, you're going to say, okay, now it's expensive. But if I charge you for successful outcomes, now it's like, okay, if I had done the same thing with a human, an external counsel, I would have paid maybe $100. So I'm willing to pay $1. So we don't have an answer yet, which is why. So what I was trying to get to was, in another place where agents are becoming fairly common and deployed in production is customer support, right? And one of the sort of marquee companies in this space, other than Zendesk, out of the valley, is Intercom. And Intercom has moved to a pricing model of any closed ticket by the agent, you pay a dollar for. So if the agent is not able to close the ticket, you don't have to pay anything. But if we successfully close it and the customer says thumbs up, you pay me a dollar for it. So that in aligns the value with what the value the customer wants, and it's a much clearer thing saying, okay, today what you truly care about is closing customer tickets, right? Everything else, how many people you have, how many seats you have, is a path to that. And so what we want to do is figure out if there is an equivalent that we can look at, that is, for sidebar in the legal tech space, that we can charge for. But the entire industry and competition is charging per seat per month, which is why if you go into a competitive bidding process and your pricing is different, you're already at a disadvantage, because now people can't compare apples to apples. So which is why we are going with a per user per month costing to start off with.
Do you think AI will increasingly make this possible? The pricing, like from input to output to outcome. Uh,
Absolutely. I think as these agents become more and more powerful, like, I would be willing to pay a cursor on a per successfully merged code basis, right? Because at the end of the day, that is the value. So now, instead of me saying, okay, I have to pay for everyone $40 a month, and that's a big cost, and now I have to monitor, are they actually using it? If I pay, okay, you write code that we merge and we pay per line, great, right? I know I'm only going to pay for things that are actually valuable to me. So definitely, it is moving towards that. It is going to, uh, that I feel is going to happen. It sort of boils down to how easy or hard it is to truly capture whether the outcome is successful or not, right? In customer success, very easy. Chat was
hmm.
closed with thumbs up, great.
or like
In
a
our world, it's
CRM
much, much
tool
harder.
which is charging you for every reply you get to a cold mail campaign. Like that
Yeah.
could be interesting. That you're not paying for the campaign per se, but every successful meeting lined up, for example, and
Every
you
meeting
pay.
booked, you pay for it. Great.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And there
That
are, by
that
the way,
would be.
exactly
Hmm.
people doing agents in that SDR world who are charging like that. So once, and that then aligns everyone, right? Like, I, as the company, want to have a successful outcome. You want that outcome. Everyone is aligned in terms of value prop. So I think that is a natural move. Now the other side of that is, it doesn't naturally incline or align with the cost basis that you have. Like, you might have sent 100 emails and got zero replies, but you still had to pay for those 100 emails, right? All the LLM calls you had to make. So
Kind of need to do due diligence on your client then. Like, whom are you selling it to? Is what is the outcome possible that they want? Hmm.
yeah, so once you have that level of conviction that I can do this and I can do this right, then charging like that makes it much easier. Otherwise, it's very easy to burn so much money on LLMs, because they are not, while they've become many orders of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude cheaper, they're still like very expensive. And in fact, I was reading this article the other day that a lot of these AI native companies like your Perplexity, Chat GPT, the cogs and margins are insane compared to a standard SaaS offering where 80-90% is almost taken for granted. In these, it's like 20%, 30% is. And oh, what happens when I get too many free users, like that Garibaldi moment that happened with ChatGPT. Like now I'm suddenly paying for free users more than they will convert. So it's a very, very, like, it's early days, which is why pricing is a very big question also.
Hmm. Has the onboarding time come down because of AI? So you told me that 30 to 60 days was the onboarding time earlier. Is AI making it possible for customers to do more self-serve onboarding by just writing English?
Yeah, so we have an internal mandate to use AI across the org, and for the delivery and onboarding team, I think there's a lot of value to be derived from it. But it also boils down to sort of expectation setting for the customer. That's sort of where, because I can't go sell to a customer saying that, I am going to give you 100% accuracy because everything is going to be manually reviewed, and then just run an AI that may be 70-80% accurate. So it depends on sort of what the uh, ask is for the customer. So what we've started doing is, we'll tell the customer, see, for these things that you want to extract, we look at 60, 80, 90% accuracy. And the customer is going to say, you know what, for the contracts of the last 2 years, which I truly want to track and they are still ongoing, I want 100% accuracy because it matters, because those contracts are ongoing. But for this historical set for the last 20 years, it's okay if it's 70%, right? So as long as we are able to clearly call out and make sure expectations align, we can actually see a huge uplift in time in terms of onboarding time. So we just to give you an example, we onboarded a pretty large listed US company that is in the chemical space, I believe, and they have contracts that go back 30-40 years, right? Now, initially we said everything will be manually vetted, and that became like 50 or 80,000 contracts that has to be manually vetted. And of course that's going to take months and months. So we gave them a timeline of a year almost, right? And we were like, okay, you tell us what is the most important, we'll do that first so you start seeing value. But for the long tail, it's going to take a year, because I'm not going to suddenly get 1,000 people to do your 100,000 contracts, right? Then we went and asked them, do you really care about this 100% accuracy for everything? And we did a few experiments where we asked them, okay, tell us how you want this data. We'll give you the AI output. You can validate it, vet it at your end, and see if the kind of reporting and analysis you would want to do on these contracts is still coming through. And even at a 80% accuracy, they were getting enough value out of it. So we took it from a year to almost 2 months and closed it, because now we were able to run it using AI, and AI is able to do it much faster. So instead of it taking an entire year of manual validation, it took 2 months of manual validation for that 1-2 year contract, and everything else we ran through AI. And now they're seeing value from even those older contracts. And when they identified, okay, AI got this wrong. So we told them, okay, we'll update, the prompt, we'll update it. And now we've gotten that also to a higher accuracy. So AI is definitely helping. And this is again on the extraction side. Even on the templating side, we have internal tooling that takes a template that's come from your lawyer and converts it to a template on SpotDraft. But that we still manually vet each and every time, because the last thing you want is something there to be set up incorrectly.
That's
Because
ongoing contracts.
yeah, and that will become like, what ends up happening is we set up that template. There are two legal people, but there are 500 salespeople who are using that template, and the sales guy is not going to read. Right? He wants to close that deal. So as soon as a contract
What
comes out, he's going to.
exactly happens in onboarding? What does your onboarding team do? They create templates for the company which are as per their regular contracts. Like if a company has a lot of, let's say, contracts with drivers, so they'll be like, and so on, there'll be like maybe 100 different templates. So in the onboarding process, you make those templates available through a drop down menu where somebody can just select. That's what they do, your onboarding team?
So it's not just that. So we will do what we call assisted migration. So if you have contracts sitting in any tool or even in a Google Drive or your hard disk, you want them, to be correctly set up and imported into the system. So you can do it yourself, but a lot of times, especially for US customers, it's just so much cheaper to get it done via us. So they'll give us, 10, 100,000 contracts. We'll segregate them by contract type, by region, entity, geo, whatever. And again, we use AI for a lot of it, but manually vet depending on the customer's risk tolerance. We also will take, your so usually you will already have a template of sorts where it's like, okay, this is the Word document and it's highlighted saying this part only put for EU, this part change when you have greater than this value. So we'll take that and we will set it up in our templating system with those conditions in place. So essentially what happens is the sales guy can, or whoever the non-legal person can just fill out a questionnaire, and based on the answers to the questionnaire it will automatically generate the right contract. Now, of course, I'm oversimplifying it because you can do, the questions also change based on what answers you give, the contract also changes based on what answers you give, the approval requirements change based on what answers you give. So all of this put together is the approval work, is the workflow. So when we do an onboarding, we'll say, okay, we'll set up one or two workflows for you. We'll teach you how to set up the workflows. You can see how it's going. So you can do it yourself. Or if you don't have bandwidth internally, you can ask us and we charge on a per workflow basis then. So, it's like, okay, with your license, one or two setups are included. And then beyond that, we can do it at a paid per workflow basis.
How much of your revenue is subscription and how much is this services kind of revenue?
Around 80-85% is subscription. Services is a sliver. And
Because services only happens when you're signing up a new client, the one-time onboarding.
that's what we thought, but we've also seen with some of our customers, as so usually what ends up happening is we'll start with one team. So for example, it's like, okay, the sales team, we want to scale how much sales we are doing, so we want to automate it. But now we are seeing value in that, so actually let's get procurement or HR or some other team also set up. And either the person who is the legal operations person would try to set those up themselves, or they'll come and say, you know what, actually in procurement we have these 5,000 contracts sitting, I don't want to manually import them, let's get SpotDraft to do it. And that then becomes additional one-time revenue that comes after, the customer's been onboarded. So we do see some of that happening, and especially when there's expansion happening within a customer, either at a geo or at a business unit level, that's usually when this comes up.
And this importing is essentially a classification and tagging process, like classify what kind of contract and uh, data extraction and filling up some fields and all.
Yeah, and what we do is, for example, we were working with the events company. So they sign a lot of contracts with hotels. Now they'll say, okay, how much food is included, how many minimum guarantee, what dishes are included, is tax included or not, is parking included or not, how much is the parking charge. So that is truly what they care about, because those are the things then they have to charge for, right? And so they set up our tool to automatically extract parking is free or not, what kind of parking is there, and some 50 different data points. So you can configure the tool to extract anything that is, critical to your business. We support some 150, 200 fields out of the box, which are very, very general purpose, like, when does the contract signed, when does it expire, who's it with, what is the jurisdiction. So very basic stuff we have out of the box. But when you have things that are unique to your business, you can configure it, and we have a way for you to see how well it is performing. You can keep updating it, you can still use that data and push it to reports and push it to other systems. So that is where the true value comes, because now you're extracting information relevant to your business.
Hmm. There's this concept of context window that you can feed data to your chat, which is currently ongoing, and so as long as the data is within the context window, so it can refer to whatever you fed it, whatever document, etc., and give you information from that. And I believe the bigger the context window, the more expensive it is. So an organization which has sidebar, would the context window be all contracts of that organization? Because someone can go to sidebar and say, find all contracts, like this events company, find all contracts where I am responsible to pay parking. So then it would actually need to see each and every contract and see where I am responsible for parking. And that sounds like a very expensive query. Is that the case, or is there a way to optimize it? And
So great question. Uh, so short answer is you end up having to put it in the context. But what we do is we have many different, 3 or 4 different ways where we try to understand which part of the contract is even relevant for this question. So instead of passing the whole contract, I will do retrieval and identify the relevant pieces and only pass those to answer. That's one piece. The second is when you're doing analysis of any sort on more than 5 items, we actually treat it as doing analysis on each item individually and then summarizing and contextualizing the final answer. So what it'll do is if you have 1,000 contracts, it'll go through each of them individually, try to answer the parking question. Then it'll take that 1,000 rows as a Excel or CSV and then run an LLM on it again and say, okay, this is the output. And actually, there we allow the model to also run code, because if you have 1,000 items and the model needs to remember all 1,000, it's very likely to mess up. But if it can output code that will analyze the 1,000 items, it's very likely to do the right thing. So what we do is we'll give it those 1,000, 10,000 items. It will generate code that says, okay, I need to look at the column of who is responsible for parking and generate a bar chart, or give you a categorical view on it. So then it will write some code that just counts all of that and gives the final answer. And of course, if you have multiple columns, it can do it across. And then finally, when it has that, then it'll again go and summarize saying, oh, I've analyzed, and this is an outlier, or this is what I'm seeing as the trend. So those analysis post facto is what the LLM does, but the middle part we actually make it write code so that it can run deterministically, because in a probabilistic way you'll run it 3 times, you're like, how can this analysis be different each time, right? And then you lose faith in it.
right, okay. Um, what does the org chart look like once you have become like an AI first organization, where you made it a mandate that everyone in the organization needs to use AI? Like I've heard of like every PM is mapped to one engineer, because AI does a lot of coding, as opposed to, I guess probably Google would have had one PM, one product manager with 8 or 10 engineers, which AI native companies are saying it should be 1:1. Do you see that? Is that happening within SpotDraft, or?
uh, So we have the old school mapping of around 8 to 1 still, 8 engineers to a product manager. What we are seeing is the biggest value add from AI is actually in non-technical people being able to do technical things, and this applies sort of across the board, right? So we spoke at length about how designers and PMs are now able to write code in a way, but in terms of the entire org impact, like we have revenue operations whose job it is to give insights and analyze the pipeline, the sales, what they look like, all of that. Now with agents, I am actually able to ask those questions and get answers myself. Earlier I would be in the CRM trying to figure out how do I get this, like what chart, what data point. Now I just ask it and it figures it out on its own.
Yeah, like a HubSpot has like that. I think HubSpot has some sort of like a sidebar version of HubSpot that you can just ask it.
Yeah, it's going to be everywhere, right? And
Right.
even, in fact, we don't even half the time use the HubSpot agent. So we have our sidebar supports MCP, so we can connect HubSpot to sidebar. But since it's more legal focused, it'll give a very, it'll qualify every answer which the marketing team doesn't need. So we actually use Claude for that a lot as well, because you can configure MCP there. And in fact, we have our own MCP server. So now the legal team uses Claude to ask questions about the contracts, because and ask questions where it's like mixing data from HubSpot and SpotDraft can happen in Claude. Earlier, that would be first, let me get a report from the RevOps guy. Now, let me get a report from the legal ops guy. Now, I am sitting and trying to map them and, trying my luck with VLOOKUP, which I've never gotten to work properly, as opposed to the agent has done 90% of the work. And now I'm just looking at the final result. And going back to RevOps and saying, does this data look right? Right. So that has been the key change in operational and organizational behavior, where we have enabled people to go get the data themselves and then go to the relevant expert asking, is this right or wrong, versus go to the expert to even get access to the basic data. In terms of changes on the like we have in fact set up roles where their job is to just, how can I use AI to do everything faster? Like, BDR team has one person who's figuring out, can I generate emails automatically? Marketing team has two people figuring out, can I generate copy and content and all of that automatically. So within the team we are empowering people to do it, and in product and eng and design, that's become like, without using AI, if someone I see don't is not using AI, I'm going to try to have a hard conversation with them that if you don't do this, you will become obsolete.
What is MCP? How does it work? Like,
So yeah, sorry, I'm so deep in it, I just throw out these terms. But so a lot of the power of agents comes from their ability to use to have the agency to use tools, right? They can decide that I want to use the browser's tool or the search tool to go look at something and then give you an answer, right? So MCP is something that Anthropic, which builds Claude, came up with. It is a protocol to allow a standard way of defining these tools. So if you talk about SpotDraft, like, we have an MCP thing that has tools like find contracts, get contract text, review contract, approve contract, whatever. Now I can give that MCP server to Claude, and then Claude now suddenly knows how to talk to SpotDraft, right? Oh, Claude says I can get contracts, I can approve contracts, I can review contracts. Now I can also add another MCP tool, let's say for Google Drive. It's like, okay, search Drive, get document. Now I can say find which documents are present in SpotDraft and not present in Google Drive and copy them over to Google Drive. So what it'll do is, it's like, okay, first let me go ask SpotDraft to give me, call that tool using MCP, give me contracts, then call the tool of Drive to say search for this contract, then call another tool in Drive saying save this contract, right? So that in the old age, pre-agents would be, you have to use these APIs, which means now you're writing code, or you will use something like a Zapier and build out a workflow, and then you'll rely on Zapier's whatever tools that exist in Zapier. So MCP is essentially a way to give the agent the ability to call any tool because there's a standard protocol around it.
and this you said you set up an MCP server, so there's not like a self-service kind of thing where you sign up to a service of an MCP server. There's something which you have to build for your tool.
So we as SpotDraft had to build it for SpotDraft, but now if any customer wants to use it, we'll just give them a URL, you just put it there, and then it'll start talking to your SpotDraft instance.
Okay, so any of your customers who are using Claude can connect Claude to SpotDraft because you have built an MCP server for SpotDraft. And I guess this is the new API. Like there was a time when companies didn't have APIs, and then everybody wanted an API, and like a company like Postman became a unicorn on the back of that move of everyone building APIs for their products and API first products. So, do you think the future is MCP first products?
See, it is too early to say for sure, but we are seeing, if you have a well designed and well built MCP server, then a lot of, so if we look back at why APIs were even important, it's like that allows me to do inter service communication that otherwise someone is copy pasting essentially, right? So that is sort of the simplest way to think about why APIs are important and why they became so powerful. Now MCP is essentially an API, but it also puts the onus on the person developing the MCP server to give enough details of how it should be used, right? Same way as API documentation meant that the people can use it right, the MCP part means that your agent can use it right. So what that allows is, like, you could maybe get away from building a lot of very, very nuanced features, because you can say, okay, this you can just go ask an MCP server, MCP enabled agent, and it'll give you the answer. So now you don't need to go and build each and every long tail functionality. So it is definitely going to change how things are built. And even when you look at examples and demos from people like Microsoft, so they are very heavily investing in this to the extent that they demonstrate that. I think Satya Nadella, in fact, said, "Oh, using Copilot and the MCP server on Microsoft Dynamics, I get insights into what the sales team is doing. Earlier, I needed one person to set up dashboards for me. Now that dashboard is getting generated." So that is where, like, do I even need a dashboard support, because MCP can generate that dashboard, right? And it makes it much easier to get that initial customer set happy with long tail of asks, because you don't need to write code, you don't need to do anything other than describe your problem in English. And if you see enough people doing the same thing, then yes, I will build a dashboard, because clearly that is important. But in the initial days, otherwise I couldn't solve this problem at all, and now I can.
Hmm. Okay, fascinating. What is your ARR today, and how much of it is from the US?
Our ARR is double digit millions, more than 67, 60, 55%, I think, is US. Uh, 25-30% is rest of world, and the remaining is India.
Okay, you're still servicing the India market.
Oh yeah, India is actually a big market for us because we were first here. We have now, in a lot of ways, become the benchmark. So people will compare against SpotDraft and say, this other tool is much cheaper. Why should I go with SpotDraft? Is become the conversation. So thankfully, that means we get a lot of pull instead of having to push, where customers come to us saying, okay, you have to be part of the RFP process for a CLM in India. And so yeah, India is still a pretty large market for us.
And when you say double digits, what is that? Is that like teens, or like 30 plus, 20 plus? What?
It's on the teens side, more on the teen side than on the 90 side.
About building an AI first organization, especially for non-tech people, do you have any advice for non-tech people on how they can be AI fluent?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the bigger question for me is, if a non-tech person is trying to do, any sort of any activity online, are they going to one of these chat GPT or Gemini and trying? Because if you try, you might realize that, oh wow, I didn't even know this was possible, right? Like, there's a new image editing model that Google released just a few days back. You almost don't need Photoshop anymore. It is that level of good. Like, and I'm not exaggerating, because we tried it. In fact, I had to publish some article, and we needed some marketing images. I just took some of the old images and drew something by hand, and the marketing team was not able to tell that it was an AI generated image, right? So it's a question of experimenting with the parts that today you are doing manually, or you are using a technical person for, and seeing if the result is good enough. Uh, to the extent that we have our HR team, they wanted to do some quiz as one of the monthly engagement activities. So earlier they would have come and found an engineer who is willing to help them and maybe taken one day of their time. This time that entire quiz was built by them using one of these Replit or Lovable, and they ran it, and everyone was like, "Oh, this has such nice animations," and they are like, "Yes, I had to prompt it 5 times for the animation to work." Right? But if you don't try, then it's not going to happen. So I think the biggest thing is at least knowing what the possibilities are, so that when you have a ask come up that you would have gone to a technical person for, now okay, I can go to a Replit, I can go to a Figma, I can go to a Canva and get that out. Earlier, like, and I've seen this happen with our org, where I was showing them of image editing, and then the design team is like, "Oh, I didn't know this exists. Now I'm going to use this every day." Right? So knowing is, I think, most of the battle right now.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, you've built for multiple markets. The DrinkLink product was like a consumer product for maybe a youth kind of a market, and then You had the dev shop, which was a B2B service, and even SpotDraft was first for freelancers. And uh, how should someone who's starting off for the first time think about which market to build for? What problem to select and solve?
See, I might have a contrarian view there, but I personally, the way I look at it is either what is your unfair advantage and how are you tapping into it? So when we talk about DrinkLink, my unfair advantage was my co-founder was a promoter who knew 80% of the clubs in New York City already. So we knew exactly what their problem statement was, who is going to be the one making a call on, are we going to let five stags in? And so we were able to really build understanding that. And I had seen the other side of the problem, which is like what people don't get in and people have plans and people are willing to pay. So we were able to merge those two there. Similarly, in the case of SpotDraft, I had dealt with contracts as I was working with my dad and working on Coderby, where I had seen that, okay, I need someone to sit and review these. And I would, use free help from friends, but also had to pay a few times when we had a couple of larger contracts that we had to review. So I was aware of that side. And then, of course, Shashank, having worked on Wall Street, being a lawyer himself, had a much, much deeper insight and understanding on what exactly in house counsel does, what outside counsel does, what are some of the challenges. So it is that combination of expertise in the problem space and being able to understand it from a technical side and really getting it together is where I think I see success, because if you don't have an unfair advantage in any of these sites, then you are sort of working from a point of disadvantage, because someone else who's done that before or who knows that world better will come up and then leapfrog you. And of course, distribution is the last one, where if you have any distribution advantage, that is always going to trump everything else. And the Slack versus Microsoft Teams is a classic example of this. We saw this play out when we launched Google Classroom, where we got, I think, 50K signups or 500K signups in the first day. And that was only because we were a Google product, right? Any startup trying to do that would be happy with 50 signups on the first day. So that those are, I would say, the three key factors for me. And with AI, actually, I feel people operating in the nichest of niches are going to be more successful than people who are coming from outside and trying to solve. Because the problem statement and problem area so much better, and with AI solving it is becoming so much easier, that you can just go in and test that market, test that theory of, okay, is this problem even worth solving, without any, without spending lakhs and lakhs or millions of building that MVP or prototype.
Hmm. Uh, you know, there is this common advice given to founders of persistence, grit, resilience. If you guys had bought that advice when you were serving freelancers, that we should be resilient and make this market work out, you wouldn't be here today. How do you balance that need to have grit with the need to exit? And you've had like 3 exits, right? Like you walked away from uh, both those opportunities and the freelance opportunity. So what signals came to you that you were able to walk away?
Yeah, I would say, see, resilience and grit is not about sticking to a problem statement. It, like, you have to be willing and able to pivot if you start hearing signals from the market. And that's essentially how we moved away from that freelancer world. Was we realized that no one is going to pay, right? We can get some Indian freelancers will pay anywhere from a rupee to maybe 1,000 rupees per contract, but it's not a recurring revenue business. It's a very, very high churn business. So that is when we started talking to enterprises. We realized that these guys are willing to pay what we would have made from 5,000 or 50,000 freelancers. One person will pay. So the resilience great part for me is being able and willing to stick and keep at it, versus saying that this is the only problem I'll solve. Because we went from freelancers to contract review to CLM, then back to contract review, right? And it's all about making sure that you're listening to your customers, making sure that if they are saying things that you don't are not solving for, and that is what you keep hearing over and over again, then let's pivot, but let's continue at it, right? Le- and we've done that 2 times, and we've, in fact, the company was set up in Gurgaon and we moved to Bangalore. We got everyone to move to Bangalore with us, right? And they did that because they believed that, okay, what we are doing now actually makes sense and is a problem to solve, and that comes from talking to customers. So the resilient side for me is having conviction to keep going, even if it means changing what you're working on.
But why did you move to Bangalore? For
Oh,
talent.
we were having such a hard time hiring in
Yeah.
Gurgaon, and
Okay.
everyone good we would talk to, out of college or even with a few years of experience, they're like, I actually want to go to Bangalore, and we're like, okay, we have to go to Bangalore, otherwise we will never be able to hire. And it's just like the ecosystem is here. So if you're not in the valley, at least be in Bangalore.
Got it. Got it. Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It was a real pleasure, Madhav.
Thanks, Akshay. It was a great conversation. I loved chatting, and we'll look forward to seeing the podcast and hope if there's any questions, I would love to answer them as a follow on as well.